What this session is about, it's about IIoT, cybersecurity frameworks and standards. And before we have the discussion, like I personally have done in a couple other sessions, I want to frame ARC's view of that topic, and then the panelists can frame how they see things and give their own perspectives. First of all, to frame things for us, cybersecurity is one of the things that we get asked an awful lot about. IIoT, which stands for Industrial Internet of Things, that's the term we use at ARC. We get a lot of questions about cybersecurity related to that. It's probably the key concern, many companies say, and it's kind of hindering their adoption of certain ideas that they have to deploy devices. And one thing we think, at least, is, most security people will say, well, they can't deploy that until they figure out how to secure it. And the companies say, yeah, and they're going to go and deploy it. So it's naive to think that they're going to wait for people to come up with standards for that. And what we're finding that companies are interested in, as you'll see, one thing is security of devices, and there's a lot of work about that, but it's also other things, processes and procedures and things like that to use for deployment of IIoT devices. So from ARC's perspective, we see IIoT, a lot of people see it as simply adding devices within plants or within some type of a traditional control system. We see it as a much broader vision than that, and it has two components. First thing is there's an environment that allows open connection between things. Anything can talk to anything, supposedly in a secure way. And then the things. And the things to us, again, we're being very broad, and I've had people question me saying it's too broad. That's fine, but so I'm giving you that as insight. But for us, a thing could be a device, it could be a system somewhere, it could be a plant, it could be a substation. And in the future, it's just accept that as my definition. And today, most companies tend, when you hear people talk about IIoT or Industrial Internet of Things, and also Industry 4.0 and that, they're really talking about using more devices. Now, Industry 4.0 is probably different than that. I don't want to go down that path. But most companies, when they see it and they talk about that, they talk about how can I deploy devices in my plant securely? Good question. But that's just today's use case. Tomorrow, we think the use cases are going to be much, much more general than that, where you have things spread out all over the place. So to bring that home to you, here's today's use case. That picture on the right there is the traditional Purdue model, or, well, the traditional industrial hierarchy. I don't want to get into Purdue model, what it is and isn't, but it's a traditional structure. We're down at the bottom in the pink is the control system. Then might be a DMZ, though I don't know if everybody has those. And above that is some kind of a corporate enterprise system. And the idea is people want to put more IoT devices down into the plant. And the thing there that they generally want to do is they want to collect the data, send it up to a cloud, and analyze it up there. And then there's also the issue, and a lot of people only see that issue. Of course, there's also the issue that the device suppliers have to get in to manage the devices. I think everybody accepts the fact that devices are always going to be subject to new vulnerabilities, and somebody has to maintain that security and patch them and stuff. And personally, I kind of frame it as a device manufacturer's problem. So you need to be able to have something to get the data inside, to put these devices inside a plant, and then enable access to the cloud to send data out and to bi-directional communication with the companies. Now, that's today's use case, and as you see it, I say at the bottom, I don't think that's people need to address that issue today in plants, but it's not an overwhelming issue. I think today's standards define things you can think about to do that. You might need something with secure remote access. I've been talking about that a lot because I think that's an important issue. But it's an enhancement, probably, of what exists today. Tomorrow, though, what we see is the Industrial Internet of Things is just like the Wild West there. Imagine that thing in the middle is just this open environment. Everything is going to connect to everything. And when I say everything, there are things in there like corporate IT systems, SCADA systems, vendor IT systems, the vendors themselves, the people that's at the top, vendor IT systems. There's going to be IoT devices in the cloud. There's things called IIoT device platforms. And then at the bottom, you see all kinds of different things that I call things, all right? The little ones are just devices, and then the next ones, the green with the red inside, are like subsystems with devices, maybe package systems where somebody adds new devices. The ones with the blue around them as well is going to actually be a plant with these things embedded in. So it's the case we just talked about, except it's in this open environment of everything talking to everything. Being able to. I'm not saying they will or they won't, but you want to enable that. That's the kind of the vision of IIoT, because you're trying to use it as a platform for future development of control systems. And as a control engineer myself, an old control engineer, I'm old and I was a control engineer, a previous control engineer. You know, if somebody gave me that and says you can connect anything to anything, and someone said, hey, I want to do this little thing on a control system, I wouldn't think twice about it. Say, oh, well, we could just put this device out here, and we could just put this device out here and get that data integrated in, and we'll do better control. And that's probably true. But the big problem is that if you look at that picture right there, there's none of these natural boundaries. The one thing I didn't say about the previous slide is that box where I had the traditional hierarchy is in a plant. And it's got some gates around it. I mean, it's a fixed perimeter. You can define the use case. It's protect these things within this boundaries and with certain interfaces. In this case, you don't have any boundaries. You know, anything can be put anything, anywhere. And you also don't even have clear use cases. Like, we had a panel discussion on this topic a few years ago at the forum. And I invited Dell Peterson, if you all know Dell Peterson from the S4 and from Digital Bond. And I thought Dell was going to make a big point about secure devices. That was his big thing then. That was what all you heard from Dell. I mean, I don't mean it when I say that. I mean, it was a good point, but that's what you heard all the time. And instead, he said, Sid, that's too general. Unless we know what the use cases are, you can't develop a strategy for it. And at first, I was kind of a little frustrated. He undermined my whole point, but his point was well taken. But the point here that I'm making today is, part of the problem is to define the use cases or to give people some kind of a mechanism by which you can define use cases for people like this young engineer up here who would deploy things without having any guidelines. It's providing those guidelines to make, so one, I think personally you need to kind of come up with some possible use cases, figure out how you're going to defend them, and then say to somebody, if you want to do this, you should follow these guidelines. These are the valid ones, these are the invalid ones. And here's an example of when I say future use cases. I don't know how far it is in the future. This is one I made for a power system, just as a picture. When you think of the things that are interconnected today, I mean, you have enterprise systems connected with smart consumer devices. You have a lot of remote assets that are used to control power, the distribution networks, substations. You have power plants down there. You have new DER type of systems that are being integrated into smart cities, mobile devices, cloud services, and all that. And they're literally all being connected. And there's lots of ways people are doing it through the cloud, or through some kind of a system. You know, we see this in smart cities. Here's the smart cities example. And when you think of smart cities today, we do a lot of research on smart cities, and one of the big issues is what communication network do I use? And there's all kinds being proposed, and is a key problem for cities. Putting in a platform, they want to really enable connection of all kinds of things so they can collect all kinds of data to help their citizens. And then they also want to share it with other companies so that those other companies can develop applications, again, to help those citizens. Maybe they're ones they sell for fee, but they're enabling that. So in that case, you know, you got smart consumer devices again, you got all kinds of power distribution, public safety systems, smart lighting, water systems, and so on. So we see that. So when I use the term industrial Internet of Things, like I said, it's a very broad perspective. Now, the question for this panel in a way, or what we want to talk about today, the way I want to frame it is, let me see if I have a slide. Oh, when I mention the thing, we see a lot, and this is one example, of people developing frameworks and standards for what's a secure device, because again, they're thinking of the problem as purely securing the device. I just want to reiterate, we see that as a very, very important thing. I applaud what they do. I mean, it's very good. And it's looking at things, roots of trust, and it gets into supply chain and stuff like that. But on top of that, there's another issue, and that's this thing with secure use cases, policies, procedures, organizational issues, and things like that. So we think that's more the challenge. And to do IIoT cybersecurity, I probably said all this already. I do this all the time. I step on my own slides. But it's, what it means is really security of the IoT environment, security of the IoT devices, it's security of the supply chain, it's development of valid use cases, it's things like if I develop policies, how do I monitor and compliance with those policies? Particularly in something like a smart city today, one point I made in the previous session I was in over there was the thing about regulations and, a lot of services and infrastructure are serving the public, and so people expect them to have regulations and compliance requirements and things like that. So that is a big IIoT cybersecurity challenge. Now, with that said, that's Sid Snitkin's perspective, and ARC's hopefully, I think it is.